Is this video worth watching? Is that book worth reading? Let's talk about how you can decide. Welcome back, my friends. Today I want to share some cool insights from an essay that Wayne Booth wrote in 1982 called The Company We Keep. In this essay, he points out that we have a lot of media and artistic experiences coming at us all the time, and he argues that we need a way to figure out which pieces of art are good and which ones are bad. Personally, this essay has done a lot to help me understand the responsibilities that I have as a writer, and it's also played a fundamental role in research that I'm doing now to understand the ways that creators and their audiences relate to each other. But between you and me, a lot of this essay sounds a little like an old man saying grumpy things about how books are better than TV and about how TV is going to ruin everything, so I'll spare us those details for today and instead focus on the really worthwhile gems that are in this essay. We'll start out by discussing the things that Booth says in the essay, but at the end we'll build on those ideas and talk about what it all means for us as creators and not just consumers of media. When we're trying to figure out whether a piece of art is good or bad, Booth says, we tend to focus on the consequences, usually in terms of what that art leads someone to do. That is, if art leads someone to do something bad, then it's probably bad art. And while Booth wrote this essay before it was ever an issue, you've seen a great example of this kind of consequences talk if you've ever run into the debate about whether violent video games are good or bad. Usually, the argument revolves around the question of whether violent video games cause real-world violence. And as critics of those games might say, violent games are bad because their consequences, real-world acts of violence, are bad. Booth would argue that asking if violent games cause violence is the wrong question. He thinks that the real measure of a work's value lies somewhere else. As he writes, the most serious limitation of consequence talk is that it tells us nothing about the quality of the lives lived during a given artistic experience. It is one thing to show that an experience changes people's behavior. It is quite another thing, obviously more important, though even more difficult, to show that an experience is desirable or undesirable in itself as experience. So instead of asking whether violent video games cause violence, Booth would encourage us to ask whether those experiences of virtual violence are worth having in themselves. It doesn't matter so much how a game affects someone's behavior. What really matters is if the game offers an experience that is in itself worth having. If a game or a book or a video offers us an experience that is in itself good or desirable, then Booth would say that that piece of media is probably pretty good. Of course, none of this is to say that consequences are totally unimportant, just that when we pay too much attention to consequences, it can distract us from paying attention to the quality of the experiences that we're having while we're consuming that media. Because when you think about it, when we watch a movie or listen to a song or sit in a room with a sculpture, we're letting that piece of art determine how we live our lives for a certain amount of time. So it's really worth asking if the experience defined by that art is really giving us the best way to live in that moment. In a book that Booth wrote later, also called The Company We Keep, he explained art's influence on our lives like this. We can say that the work shows us how our moments should be lived. If the maker of the art did not believe that simply experiencing constitutes a superior form of life, why was the work created and presented to us in the first place? The real task for us then is to determine whether the media that we consume is giving us a chance to live our lives in better ways while we're experiencing it. And Booth acknowledges that that can be a difficult thing to do, but luckily he gives us some guiding questions that can help us to make more informed decisions. You may have heard the saying that we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time around, and 5 may not be the magic number, but the point is that the people around us have an influence on us. And since Booth's essay is called The Company We Keep, you might see where we're going with all this. As Booth lays out his approach for evaluating the quality of the experiences that various media offer us, he asks a series of questions designed to get us to think about who we're spending time with and what influence they're having on us. And the first of his questions is, where are we? Obviously, you'll have different kinds of experiences in different kinds of places. You'll be influenced in one way by a grassy meadow in the mountains, and another way by a dark alley in a dangerous city. There's not too much to say about this question, but it's still worth thinking about. Is a certain experience taking you somewhere that you want to be? Second, Booth asks, who are we? And he mostly talks about how the different forms of media treat us as either active participants or passive observers, and again, he seems to have a thing against TV and video for some reason, but it's a relevant question nonetheless. What role is the art asking you to play? That question might actually be pretty obvious to answer in a medium like video games. Are you playing as a hero or a villain? Are you working to save a kingdom or terrorize a city? But you could also ask questions about how the game treats you. Does it insult your intelligence by giving you too many hints along the way? Or does it disrespect your time by being needlessly difficult and time-consuming? And of course, you can consider these questions for other forms of media too, asking yourself who you're meant to be and how that piece of media is treating you. For example, you may not want to spend as much time with a video that treats you in a condescending way, but you may be more likely to stick around for one that treats you like a peer or a friend. Booth's third question is who dwells there with us, which ties most directly to the company that we keep when we're participating in art. And he elaborates by saying, who I am in a given imaginative encounter is inseparable from the question of the kind of people I'm living with. Voices come to me from these screens and from these printed stories. Who converses with me here? What kind of companionship is being offered? What company do I keep? So, is a book or movie inviting you to spend time with someone that you admire, or asking you to sympathize with people who are doing deplorable things? Does the voice of the author or creator treat you with respect or with contempt? And think about the characters and narrators that you come into contact with while you read, watch, or play. How does spending time with them affect you? Do they leave you better off, or do they diminish the quality of the life that you're living in that moment? And finally, Booth asks, what do we desire, what do we hope for in the imagined world we have entered? Stories and other media set us up to hope for certain outcomes and to desire certain things. Does a novel set you up to hope for the redemption of a misguided villain? Does a game lead you to desire the destruction of evil, or does it condition you to exploit innocent people for profit? Does a vlogging channel set you up to hope for a meaningful relationship with the creator, only to tease you with a friendship that it can never truly deliver? Whatever it is, a work of art can subtly or even overtly nudge you to hope for a certain kind of outcome, and Booth suggests that the way that a work influences what you want can be an indicator of how good that experience is. So, for example, if you find yourself wanting something while watching a TV show that you wouldn't actually want in your real life, then that may be a good sign that that show isn't worth your time. In all of this, Booth recognizes the standards for what counts as good for any person in any situation are far from universal. So he makes a point of saying that one significant aspect of his approach for evaluating the media that we consume is to talk to other people about the criteria that we're selecting for deciding whether something is good or bad. That is, instead of just giving us rules from his own limited viewpoint, he recognizes that our best chance for establishing good criteria is including multiple perspectives in an ongoing discussion about what counts as good. And he even points out that spending time with bad media can become valuable if it helps us to make better decisions in the future. But of course, this show is called Writing with Andrew, not Media Criticism with Andrew, so I'd like to finish off by talking about what this essay has meant for me as a writer. You see, while Booth writes from the perspective of a reader, his insights have a lot of implicit value for writers too, and this essay causes me to stop and think more carefully about the kind of company that I'm offering to the people who will read what I write. One common habit of less experienced writers is that they tend to write mostly for themselves. That is, they focus mainly on expressing their ideas and feelings without thinking too much about how readers will perceive or understand what they write. As a result, the work of less experienced writers can be a little self-serving at best and totally inaccessible to a reader at worst. I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism. Learning to get your ideas out of your head and onto paper is an important first step. In fact, it probably has to be the first step in a writer's development. But it can't be the last step. In order to become a more effective writer, it's important to learn how to see your work through a reader's eyes. So instead of just trying to say what you think, you look for ways to say it in a way that your reader will have an easy time understanding. Or instead of just telling a story, you'll work to tell that story in an exciting and well-paced way. Then it's not just about expressing yourself, it's about your reader understanding what you write in the way that you intend. But if we also think about the company that we're asking our readers to keep, then we start to think about the relationships that we're trying to build with them and the experiences that we're trying to share with them. Then the question is whether we feel good about how we're asking our readers to spend their time, and the focus turns to making sure that the things we create are worth it from our reader's point of view. When I teach a class, for example, I don't just read off the things that my students need to know. I also try to do things that will make it worth their time to get across campus and show up for a morning writing class. So instead of just telling people that they need to connect their claims and evidence, I might ask them to inspect a crime scene in order to build a case to prove a suspect innocent or guilty. Of course, it's all still school, so it's not like fun is allowed, but the point is that I don't feel good asking people to spend time with a dry lecturer because I would hate to spend time with one. As a result, I try to create the kind of class experience that I would want to have. And the same thing happens on this show. There are elements of each video that don't contribute directly to transmitting information. Instead, they work to define the kind of relationship that I hope to establish with you, dear viewer, because the goal isn't just to show people what I know, it's to help you to become the kind of writer that you want to be. And I try to do it by creating the kinds of videos that I wish I could have watched when I was starting out. Now, whether or not I'm succeeding is something you'll have to tell me. At any rate, it's an effort inspired by the company we keep, and it's an effort to make sure that the things that I create are worth my audience's time. So, as you write and create, practice looking at your work from your audience's point of view. If you were them, would you want to read what you just wrote? Make sure it's clear. Make sure it respects their time and intelligence. Make sure that they don't finish and wish they'd spent their time doing something else. You may not get it right on the first try, but that's okay. That's what practice is for. I'm sure not everything I do is a perfect bullseye, but even when you miss, you're still on track as long as you're learning. The important thing is that you started thinking more about your audience than about yourself, and that's a huge step forward no matter what you're writing. It's hard to say if Booth was right about video being worse than books, but I do think he was onto something when he suggested that we pay more attention to the way that media asks us to spend our time. And building on that idea, it's valuable to think about the ways that we're asking our readers to spend their time. Whenever we write something, we make the implicit claim that our readers will be better off after they finish reading, so we had better make sure that that claim is actually true. In that light, I certainly hope that our little discussion today was worth your time. If not, well, I guess you wouldn't still be watching. So for those of you who have stuck around, thank you for spending your time with me, and have a great week.